give it a shot, see how it goes. If you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to pop it in the chat, and I'll do whatever I can to answer it. Let me just get my phone all ready. Give me one quick second. And yeah, that's basically it. Nothing complicated. So let me just pop out the chat window and make sure I have everything set up. Alrighty, let's see here. All right, cool. So if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to just drop it in the chat and I'll try and answer it quickly. That's basically it. So if you read the description, I'm making a simple app where people who are sports gambling fans like myself can go and see predictions that other people make. And if they like a certain, what they call a handicapper, if they like a certain handicapper a lot, they can purchase picks from that handicapper. I'm using a combination of technologies, obviously React, Redux. I'm also going to use Turbo in addition to Heroku. So I'm combining these two right now. And then I'm going to standard stack behind that, so MongoDB and stuff like that. So to give you a heads up, the project is already started. I started the code on this maybe 4 or 5 days ago. So we're diving right in. This is not really a tutorial. So keep that in mind. This is not a tutorial per se. I'm just going to code like I normally do, but try to think out loud as I do it so that anyone who's watching can get a sense of at least my thought process and maybe hopefully apply some of those principles to theirs. Okay, so let's just get into it. So I have the code already going. Here is the code base. I'm going to open up my terminal, cd into the project. It's called the Varsity, and I have an app directory for that. I'll make the text and everything big like I normally do in a tutorial, but again, I'm not going to go at tutorial speed. I'm going to run the Mongo shell. Here's my NodeMon server going. And let's open up a browser and get this sucker running. So it's localhost 3000. But here's what I have right now. As you can see already, I have some stuff lined up. But it's all static data. There's nothing really here that's database driven yet. So this is all React Redux. So I'm going pure straight React Redux on this. And yeah, it's basically it. So, and here is the React Redux source. I'm working on this component right now, the home component. And what I was working on just now before I started this live feed is this section right here called card right here, where it renders these CTAs over here where you can purchase subscription plans. So that's what I was working on just now, as well as this section right here, what's called lines. So a line is basically a handicap for a sports game. So if you have two teams that are not equal in quality, so if you like the NBA Finals right now are a good example. Like everyone knows that the Golden State Warriors are a better team than the Cleveland Cavaliers. So to make the betting more interesting, you apply a handicap, which is called a line or a spread, and that's basically the prediction that how much the Golden State Warriors should win by. So tonight's line for the game 2 of the NBA Finals, I think, is 11.5. It's actually a very big line. Yeah, I just got your message, Ryan. Thank you. Yeah, you can probably just hear what I'm saying. I keep forgetting it's not like it's only chat one way. So yeah, thanks, Ryan. I'm just sort of moving things around. I'm not, I'm not being as polished on this as I normally would on a tutorial. So, okay, so let's get into it. So right now I'm working on these lines right here, and this is the component I created. This component right here called lines on line 24 is this piece right here, and this is going to be database driven because lines change all the time. They fluctuate all the time. So what you need to do is get that from a database and then pump it into the actual front end. So right now this is static data, right? So it's just I'm just putting in some static data. So just to make that clear, I'm going to add one more game. So the World Cup is coming up. So I'm going to find some games that are coming up for World Cup. So Morocco and Iran is coming up in 2 weeks. So let's fill out that game. So this is going to be Well, it's not going to be. It's already a container component right here because it's going to incorporate data from the database. So it's going to be a container component. It already is a container component. So I'm going to open up my containers, and here is the lines container. And right now, as you can see, it's all static data. So I'm just going to put in another game. And the game is Morocco versus Iran. Okay, so let's get that in there. So Morocco and Iran. Now I can't handicap soccer, or if you're watching from another country, it's called football. I can't handicap that at all because I don't know a damn thing about football/soccer. So to me, every soccer game is basically a 1-point spread because even when the good teams are playing the bad teams, they usually win by a single goal. So to me, it's all just -1 for the spread. So now what I need to do next is I need to now recompile the React code. So I'm going to run a build script, which is going to recompile the React code. And the build script is defined in the package.json, which is right here. And that's going to run a clean. It's going to run the Webpack. It's going to run the gulp, convert the React components from ES6 to ES5, properly place all that in the right directories, et cetera, et cetera. That should be done in about 10 seconds. And then I'm going to reload to make sure that the next game showed up. So let's wait on that for a second. That's the Webpack. Gulp is doing its thing right now. Gulp has maybe 6 or 7 tasks to go through. So I'm not quite going at live speed. I'm still slowing down a little bit just for the sake of like articulating what I'm doing. So for example, I normally wouldn't have added this next game in real life, but this is pretty close to live speed. I would say like 75%. So maybe I was wrong about 10 seconds, maybe more like 30 seconds. Now it's doing the ES6 to ES5 compilation. Looks like that's about done. Moving some files over to the disk directory right here. That looks like that's just about done. And now it's completely done. So I'm going to reload the server and then reload the page and make sure that the next game shows up. And there we go. Okay, so it worked. So now I'm just confirming that the data shows up. Young Citra, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Street Escape #1, etc. So if you want to clarify, that would be helpful. So thanks. Okay, so now all I'm doing here is I'm confirming that the visually these lines are rendering properly. But like I said, that data is going to come from a backend, so that has to be a container, which it already is, by the way. But we need to now set it up to come from the backend. So this home component right here is where the lines are being rendered. So really what we want to do is pass in this data from an array from the home directory, just to make sure it works. Or what I'm going to do instead, actually, is I'm going to create local state in the lines. So this is what I do in real life. Like I just sort of figure out how I'm going to do it. You know, I kind of change my mind sometimes here and there. It's not all like preordained. You know, you have to think it out a little bit. So that's a common misconception a lot of beginners have, is like people think I just know what to do right away. I kind of think it through a little bit. Favorite, line, underdog. So a game consists of what's called a favorite, a line, which is a numerical value. So let's go with 1.0 on this, and then underdog. Okay, so let's start with tonight's NBA Finals game, which is the underdog is the Cavaliers. Favorite is by far the Warriors. I think it's 11.5, which is crazy high. I would take Cleveland to cover that, by the way. So if you're actually watching this and you want to pay for my insight from a gambling perspective, I think Cleveland's going to cover that. Let's see here. We also have Russia versus Saudi Arabia in the World Cup. Russia, Saudi Arabia. From my channel, this video, I'm thinking you react to YouTube videos. Young teacher, I'm not really sure what you're trying to say here, so I guess I apologize if I'm not answering your question, but keep trying and I'll do the best I can. Let's see here. Iran, Morocco. Can you explain why you use constructor function and not just state inside your class? It's the old habit, TRC4 and C3. Ultimately, this won't even be here. It's going to come from the Redux reducer anyway. So this is just a convenient way to set up some initial state with static data. Basically, I'm prepping the component for Redux integration. That's all I'm really doing here. So this will ultimately come from a backend, and all of this will be gone probably in the next 10 minutes. So depending on how fast I can get through this. So I'm just going to make up some games here because I don't know enough about World Cup. So I'm going to do Patriots. Oh, all the World Cup lines are going to be either 1 or 0 because World Cup is soccer is always a high-scoring game in soccer. Apparently, it's like 2 goals. So okay, so Patriots versus Browns, and that will probably be about a 9.5 point spread. Okay, so one thing I forgot was the league, right? So these are different sports in different leagues. So league, this is NBA. I guess for soccer, we're just going to say FIFA. Not really sure how that's going to work. And obviously, this is NFL. All right, cool. So now what we want to do is we want to iterate through that. So this .state.games, iterate through that. And that's it. So let's do that right now. So this, map through it. Game. All right, and then each one of these rows is the rendering of the game. Alrighty. All right, so when you iterate through, you have to add a key. And for now, that's just going to be the index, but we're going to change that momentarily. This is always going to be the favorite, so game.favorite. Underdog. And the line. I want to leave that alone for now, right here. We'll get to that in a second. And then let's see here. All right, this key is temporary. Really what we want is an ID inside of each game. So that's really like the first thing I should have done is the ID. But really what we're doing is we're prepping the component for the database information. So it's this is all static, obviously, but okay, cool. And then game ID. See how that goes. So now we run a build. And make sure I didn't make any mistakes. All right, so what's going to happen is we're going to get the rendering from the state. So there's going to be these 4 games, right? And then the initial 3 immediately beneath it, the static data. So we should see 7 games total, 7 rows total showing up here when it's all said and done. And the icons will be all, what did I put here? I think it's all World Cup. Yeah, these are all the World Cup icons. Okay, so let's confirm that, and then let's see what happens. Let's move on to the next thing. So really what we want to do is get get this data coming from a reducer. So this data is not even set up for a reducer yet, right? So we want to get that going in reality. So we're just prepping the component, right? So ultimately this won't be here. This right won't be here in a few minutes. So ideally speaking, so we'll find out. All right, so this will be done in a few seconds. Okay, ready to go. Let's run the server. Let's check it out. Okay, and it did not work. All right, so let's see what we did wrong here. So let's see if we're getting any kind of runtime error. Nope. I'm gonna empty the cache. All right, so what did I do wrong? So let's see here. Can you guys see it? Anyone in the comments see it? It's subtle. It's a mistake I make a lot. Right where I highlighted, if anyone can see it. Nope, okay. I forgot to return the component. So right here, it's a very common mistake I make. I forgot to do a return. So really what we want is return like that. And then the JSX code I had should have been in here like that. Okay, so let's try that again. So as you can see, the real process is not flawless. I make mistakes all the time. The real question is how quickly can you identify those mistakes? How quickly can you piece together where it broke down? And then it's pretty common, Stephen. I think once you make certain mistakes over and over again, you kind of develop a profile of the kinds of things you normally do, and you just try to not do it as much. That's basically it. But the point is, like, oftentimes people have this notion that I'm just like flying through code without making mistakes. That's just not true. I make mistakes all the time. The real skill is being able to identify and fix those mistakes in a logical fashion. So that's where people oftentimes break down, is that their debugging process is completely illogical. They just start guessing. And that's where you lose all sorts of time. You might compound the mistake. You might make the mistake worse. You're just looking in the wrong spot completely. It's just, you want to get comfortable with that debugging process, the deductive reasoning process, and basically never deviate from that. Once you start guessing, like, let me try this and see what happens, like, you're developing bad habits. And actually, one of the worst things that can happen is, like, you guess right, like you just happen to hit it by luck, but then it encourages you to do that more and more, and that's a bad habit. It creates a lot of, like, problems unnecessarily. So hopefully we found it this time. If this doesn't fix it, I'm going to start guessing. So let's see here. Run the server. All right. Looks good now. All right, cool. So that's working. So now what we want to do is properly place this data. I'm going to get rid of the static data. Steven, you're from Ireland, right? Is World Cup a big deal over there? Is football like a popular thing right now? Is everyone getting ready for that? So like I said earlier, we want this data to come from the reducer. It's already connected, as you can see down here. It's already connected to the Redux store, so we need to set up a reducer for it. I'm going to call each one of these is a game, right? Actually, I'm going to call these matchups. Um, why the minor distinction? Because oftentimes in yeah, well, USA didn't even make the World Cup, Steven, so wouldn't worry too much about it. So oftentimes, a gambling matchup isn't an actual game. Typically, it is. Like Ireland versus Japan World Cup, whatever. But sometimes it's like Tiger Woods versus the field in golf, and that's not like a matchup. That's not a game. That's a matchup, right? Like who's going to have the better round in the U.S. Open that's coming up next week, the U.S. Open golf tournament, Tiger Woods or Rory McIlroy. Um, so that's not like a game. That's a matchup, right? So I'm just making a minor distinction there, but um, you know, having done a bit too much gambling in my life, I want to make sure I cover all the angles. So, all right, so now we need to create a reducer for that, right? So we go to the SRC. Let's see here. We have a reducers. By the way, this was scaffolded from Turbo. So when I created this project, I did Turbo, new, the varsity, dash, dash, React. So like when I scaffolded this project, it looked like this. So that's what I did. And I got the whole React Redux set up already. And like that just saves a lot of time. So, all right, so we're in the reducers. I want to create a matchup reducer. That's why I made that like naming decision when I did. Um, uh, See how there's an index file in here? So I'm just going to nano into that right now. Because I wanted to make this decision now because if I have to change it later to matchup, then it creates a headache. Matchup reducer. Alrighty. Matchup reducer. Okay, looks good. And then inside the reducers, I should have renamed this matchup reducer. So matchup reducer. Go to the store and import that guy because that's something I would easily forget to do. And we're going to just call it matchup in the stores, and we're going to copy from the user reducer. Oh, but this is a residual from the actual scaffold. I might be using this. I don't remember. So I'm just going to copy this from the copy and paste it over, and then want to get rid of all these, and pretty much everything else is going to go. Alrighty, and then we're going to go with all on here for now, and this is going to be static data as well. So let's go ahead and get this over into here. So now we're moving this static data over into the reducer, right? So like one at a time, we're like conforming the application to a Redux environment. And this is the static data, right? So now theoretically, we should be able to just get rid of this altogether. So to answer somebody else's question earlier, like why am I using the constructor? It's just a temporary convenience. We can now get rid of that whole thing, and we can do this dot props matchup and then all like that. I'm referencing this key right here, right? But don't forget we didn't connect it yet, so we have to go here, say matchup, right? And this is referencing the store property. So if we go here, just make sure everything matches up, no pun intended. And that was pretty funny. And then just make sure there are no like typos or anything like that. And then let's go ahead and rebuild and make sure that's working. So again, we're just confirming that the data is coming from the right spots. Oh, sorry, I wasn't paying attention. I think we can all see the mistake here pretty easily. Matchup reducer. Get out of there. All right, let's do it again. The reason the build takes longer on this project is because there's a ton of CSS files. As you can see, the CSS build task takes the longest, and I just didn't bother to cut it down. So, all right. So let's run the server. Making a lot of mistakes here. You see this? Matchup reducery. See that? So let's fix that. All right. Let's do it again. Doesn't look like I did that here. Looks good. And then that looks okay. That looks okay. All right. So if you guys like this sort of lifestyle of like, I guess, freestyle coding, I'll do more of this. Makes it easier for me to create video content too, because oftentimes it's hard to just come up with stuff to talk about. So I'll just do some live coding, and if you have any questions, we can just hash it out as I code. And if it's ends up being a good video, I'll post it. If not, I'll just take it down. All right, so we'll be done in a second. Okay, so the lines still show up, right? And that's a good sign because now it's coming from the reducer, and that's the key. So we basically set up the reducer successfully right here to import the lines in here. So now we can get rid of this constructor with the state. We don't need this anymore. And this is properly being matched up with the reducer, the appropriate reducer. Now I want to take this to the next step. A key question I'm wondering now is whether or not we want to render this from the server or from the go straight client side, right? So in other words, um, on this component right here, we basically have two choices. We can fetch the lines from the server on the mount, upon mount, so on component did mount, or we can pipe it in from the server to have it rendered server-side rendering, and then do it that way. So I think what I'm going to do is just keep it the way it is and keep it here. Component did mount. Because we don't really need server-side rendering for this per se. Like it doesn't really help strategically. Like we don't need we don't need the Vegas lines for what do you call it? For okay, for SEO or anything like that. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to create an API endpoint. So here in my models we have profile, post, which I'm not using at all, so I should just get rid of that, pick, which has nothing to do with what we're working on right now. And then we just created another resource called matchup. So I'm going to create a matchup resource. Let's see here. What's the best way to do this? All right, so let's create a controller. So we have controllers here. So I'm going to create a controller for matchup. So let's go to the controllers. Let's do matchup controller. All right, and then let's copy and paste from one of these. You see how I just turned everything off? That's because I'm swinging over to the back end. It helps me mentally keep everything straight, like which side of the equation I'm on, of the stack, I guess. So let's see here. Okay, so I'm setting up empty promises in these reducers. I'm sorry, controllers. Basically, these are method stubs. All right, let's see here. We're only going to use the get for now. So let's do, let's go back to the reducer. Where'd you go? Here we go. Let's get these guys over here. All right, so we created some static data over here on the server side now, and we're just going to automatically resolve that for now, because there is no matchup schema or anything like that, and I don't want to deal with that right now. I'm just going to keep on going with static data. So for now, the matchup controller, where'd you go? Right here, is properly set up with static data. So you see how we're just like moving things over like a little bit at a time. Like we put it over, purely client side first, and then we put it in the reducer. Now we're setting up the backend to support this. So let's see if this works on the API side. So let's check our localhost API matchup. And here we have the static data, right? Now we created basically a dummy API for that. So we're good to go on that. I forgot to commit some stuff. So let's go ahead and take care of that right now. All right, so we want to do the controllers. Where are you? Right there. Matchup controller static data. All right, let's do the same thing for reducers. matchup reducer with static data. And we'll leave these alone for now. So let's see here. All right, let's see. So now what we want to do, whoops, we don't want that. We now have an API endpoint that will return the same static list of matchups. In fact, I'm going to add a couple more here just to sort of mix it up, make sure that, we're not using like a cache by mistake, for example. So let's do different ID here, different ID here. Add a couple more American football games. So let's do Giants, Texans. Line would be about probably 3. Let's do Panthers, Broncos, probably about 6.5. Okay, so let's confirm that those are not showing up. Okay, good. So now we want to see those games as well. So status, let's just add that real quick. Cool. All right, so now what we want to do is head back to the lines component. So where'd you go? Right here, and we want to fetch that data right here. That's why we set all that up. That's why we just went through all that. So what we want to do is create an action for that API call. So let's go ahead and create an action. So actions, and where are we going to do this? So we're going to do copy from this one and fetch matchups. We're going to use the get data right here, get data, which takes a endpoint, parameters, action type, and a resource. So endpoint, we want get data. So what's the endpoint? It's going to be API and then matchup. Matchup. Okay, the params are passed in from the actual function call. Let's do matchup received as the constant. And then what is that last one? Resource. I don't think we really need that, but let's go ahead and I'm just going to respond to a text from a friend. So just give me a second. Sorry about that. Just meeting with a friend. I just want to make sure that our schedules are coordinated. All right, so okay, so this constant does not exist. Let's go ahead and make it. So we open up the constants. This should be plural, so matchups. All right, don't forget to make the adjustment here. And then we need to go back to the reducer now and make sure that the reducer properly handles that case. So I'm going to open up the user reducer and just create a constant case for it from the user reducer. Head back to the actual action, grab this guy right here, and just right now I'm just going to console log and that's it. All right, so make sure that that's properly set up. The action name is fetch matchup. That's technically an action creator. So we go back here in the lines and then connect it, right? So that's what we're doing right here to the dispatch. And then we got to pass in the params, query parameters, right? So these are query parameters. So now we have a fetch matchups property on this component, which we can call right here. So this dot props, and that returns promise. Been doing a lot more lately with GraphQL also, and I'm starting to see why GraphQL is so popular, because it makes a lot of this stuff a lot easier to do, a lot less. Not that this is hard, but a lot less like laborious. Like there's a lot of like code that I had to sling through just to get this even set up, and a lot of that's like boilerplate. And GraphQL like eliminates a lot of that, so it's pretty good. For that reason, I'm going to start doing some more projects in GraphQL. I'm also going to incorporate GraphQL into existing projects. So like people sometimes have the misguided notion that you need to do one or the other. That's just not true. You can incorporate both in a single project. I'm probably going to do that in this project eventually. So if I keep on doing these live feeds, you'll see that as well. Let's see here. All right. So if this works, then we should see this console log. We should see these two console logs in the Chrome debugger, and then we can confirm that the data is showing up from the API, and then eventually we want to get these guys out of here, which is in the reducer initial state. We want to get rid of these and use the data from the API instead. That's basically it. So we're just setting things up again, kind of getting the project set up and ready to go. Pretty simple stuff. Okay, should be done. So now what we want to do when this is done in a couple seconds is this time we want to run it with the debugger open, right? So don't forget that. So open the debugger, and we want to get the console going, and then head over to the home page. Oh, obviously run the project. Silly rabbit. All right, I'm going to clear the cache. And yeah, what I forgot was that I'm running a production build. So there's no way of confirming whether or not this did or didn't work, because in the production build, all the console logs are stripped out. So there's a couple ways you can get around this. One is you can just do alerts instead. You can just have these come through as alerts, or we can just run a development build. So in the package.json, we have a development build already. So a development build script. So I'm going to turn this off, and then I'm going to open a new tab and do npm. The name of the script is dev. So in a separate tab, I'm going to do npm run dev, like that. And that'll run a development build, which will give us all the console logs and everything like that. So we can technically just leave this open. And like it's going to watch the files as well. So we can just leave it open and like not have to rebuild every time. The reason I don't do that is because sometimes like weird nuances happen in development build that don't happen in production, and vice versa. And ultimately production is what matters. So it's sort of like I'm being extra precautious there. But in this case, it's actually a hindrance because we want to see the console logs. So I think it's done. So all right, let's try it again. Okay, So let's clear the cache. Now, one thing you want to notice, you see this right here? This is the React Chrome plugin. It's blue and black, which means we're running a production build. So if I reload the page, it should be orange now. There it is. That's an orange. Orange means it's a development build. And now we see all the console logs, right? So on the initial, it's undefined because there's nothing there. And then here's the API callback. That means it worked. So it worked. We're good to go. So now what we want to do is we want to make sure we have the JSON structure properly reflected in the reducer itself. So we go back here into the reducer, and here's the console log we're looking at right now. So if we just grab the JSON and make sure that we don't like misinterpret it, right? So there's confirmation success and then data, and that this is the actual payload, right? And that's action data. So that structure is a little screwy. It's going to be, we're going to have to parse out action.data.data. And that's not really ideal. So confirmation success, action. So let's look into this because we don't want to maintain that. So if we go to the actions file, and we're running the get data API HTTP call. Okay, and then if I actually run the localhost API call, payload is also in data. That's what we want. But here we're doing results or results. And then let's see what the actual API manager is giving us instead. So yeah, this is just returning the raw JSON, so it shouldn't be on this side. So let's try this. Instead of response result, let's do response data. And let's see how that ends up coming out. Let's see if that gives us a different. So the goal is to not have the confirmation key here. That should be taken care of inside the API manager right here, which it is. So if that confirmation isn't there, then it throws the error. So what we really want is for this to just parse out the payload right away. So hopefully that should take care of it. So let's try it again. It reran the build on the dev environment. So let's see what we got. So I don't know if you guys can see that, but you see in the reducer, the payload now doesn't have the confirmation. It just gives you the raw payload. The data is the payload. And it may seem like a subtle thing, but these things add up over time. So I'm trying to cut down anything that would result in technical debt down the road. Because if you don't take care of it now, chances are it never gets taken care of, period. And then it just builds as the project grows and grows. So those little things may seem little, but they can grow into big problems down the road. So this is worth it. This is a worthwhile thing to do. So I'm going to make a change over here as well on the other HTTP verbs. All right, let's I think we're good to go from there. Okay, so then we go back to the reducer, and I'm going to reload one more time. Hopefully that makes sense, like what I just did and why I did it. And this JSON structure is now out of date, and we want to do this instead. And now we can do new state all action data. And now the data types match up. So now if we go to the lines, this is initially null. All right, so this is going to crash. So we want to do matchups is that dot all or an empty array, like so. And then we want to just reference that variable instead. And then inside the matchups, not null. Now it is. Okay, and then I'm running the dev watcher, so we don't have to keep on rebuilding. So maybe it is worthwhile. I don't know. Just sort of however I feel that day. All right, so let's check this out. Lines 38 matchup is not defined. So right there. Okay, there's our problem. Another mistake. Cannot read property map of undefined. All right, so let's see, lines 38. Okay, so this one is a little bit confusing because if it's null, then this variable should be an empty array. So, but it's still returning as undefined right here. So I must be making a mistake. Oh no, that's my mistake. Yep. All right. So we're already parsing out the all right here, so there's no need to parse it out again. So that's my mistake. All right. So now this is now coming from the actual API call, and that's the goal, right? So we moved it out of the, we started out purely client side, raw static HTML or JSX, and then gradually moved it up the chain, moved it into the reducer, into the store, and then into the API call. We can keep doing that and keep on moving it over to the server-side rendering, but that'll be too much, honestly. So I'm also going to do a quick check right here for if is not null. Okay, no need to fetch again. We want to reduce too many excessive requests, right? So if the matchups are already in the store, then there's no need to request it again because the data is already there, and that's it. All right, looks good. I'm going to run a production build real quick just to make sure this is working on production. And I'm going to commit some of this code, throw it up on the repo, do a quick deploy, make sure everything works on the live deployment, the staging server, and I think I'm going to call it a wrap for this live session. I can't post a link in chat, but I took a look at Redux logger for Redux state manipulations will save you console logging. Oh yeah. No, I was just, Steve, that's a good idea, Stephen. Thank you. I was just being lazy with not running the development environment, the development build script. Just being lazy. So I really should just maintain a habit of doing that, to be honest. The development build script does a fine job. It does what it's supposed to do. I just wasn't running it. So yeah, so that's pretty much the answer to that, is keep running the development build. So I'm just doing a quick production build to make sure everything works on the production, literally the production build, before I deploy it. And then once I confirm that, then we can go ahead and commit the code. So the production build is now running. I'm going to restart the server. And I'm going to take a quick peek at this color right here. It should now turn to blue. So you want to make sure about those things to confirm that everything is working. So let's just empty the cache. And there it is, and the console log is gone. Everything looks good. We're still getting the data over here, so it looks good. Everything is properly showing up the way it should. So now let's go ahead and commit some of this stuff. That should produce. What did I do there? Oh, reducer. Or all right, got them all in. Let's put that stuff up right to master because I don't have any collaborators or anything like that. It's not a really big project. All right, that's run up on master. Now what we want to do is run, I think we just ran the production build, right? So now what we want to do here, just so you understand, is we want to deploy it, but that requires two steps. So first thing we want to do is deploy it to Heroku. So that's just git push Heroku master. And while that's going up, let me explain the second step. We have another project within this project for all the static files and assets, which should be on a CDN directory. And that's where I'm using Turbo. So I'm using Turbo as a pure CDN service here because it's so easy, and you'll see why in a second. But basically what we don't want to do is serve all the static assets from the Heroku server directly, or really any web server. That's not really where it should come from. It should come from a CDN. So rather than setting up a CloudFront distribution just for this, or Cloudflare or whatever, it's just a bit of it's just kind of overkill for every small project. What I did is I set up a Turbo project just for this, and I have scripts to deploy all the static assets to Turbo, and then reference those static assets on the staging server, as opposed to the local server. So here, if you look at my local server, this is a very quick and convenient optimization that makes life a lot easier. So here, if you look at my local source code, you'll see that these imports come from the local server, so that as I make changes and commit them, it'll render right away. But if I go to the actual production or the staging environment, right? So we just deployed to Heroku a couple seconds ago. So if I go to that, we might not see the changes, right? The lines don't even show up, or this is completely not what we just coded. That's because we didn't deploy the CDN static assets, or I should rephrase that. We didn't deploy the static assets to the CDN. So if you guys see the imports here, they're different. So that requires a separate deployment script, and that's just Turbo. So here we have a CDN directory, which is non-git. It's git ignored, I guess. Is the best way to put it. That way it won't go up to the Heroku server or Amazon server or whatever you're using. So what we can do now is cd to the CDN directory, which is where the static assets are maintained. And then we do Turbo. And this is where you just do a Turbo deploy. And automatically, once these files go up, they get parked right behind the CloudFront distribution. Remember, Turbo does that for you automatically. In my opinion, that's probably the second best feature of Turbo after the free SSL, the automatic SSL. So I'm taking advantage of that because why not? That's what it's for, rather than storing all those static assets directly on the web server. So that's a proper optimization. That's how you really should organize your code. Normally, this would happen in raw Cloudflare or CloudFront. But like I said, doing that, setting that up for like every single project seems like overkill. It just felt like too much to me. So I just spun up a quick Turbo project, but organize my scripts to deploy in the proper environments. And you're watching right now. We're watching that happen right now. We're putting them in the proper location. So this is going to take another couple seconds. And then once that's up, we can reload and we should see the proper changes on the staging server as we saw on local testing, hopefully. So, we'll find out in a second. Also, if you guys are big Apple fan, oh, the deployment's complete. All right, let's try it out. So I'm going to run this guy. I'm going to just empty the cache. And now we see what we need to see. If you guys see that, now we see the data from before, and that's good because that means the CDN has properly been reflected here. That's great. So everything worked. Now we see all the CTA down here, so we're good to go. Great, that's it. So we set up everything that kind of wanted to in this session. We can probably figure out what has to happen next. Like our controller for the matchup is obviously static data, so now we need to set up the models for that, the actual model schema for that. The usual stuff, and then create a way of importing these matchups into the database, and then have those render, et cetera, basic CRUD stuff. So, all right, cool. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching this live feed. I'll start doing some more of these if people think it's worthwhile. Yeah, this project will take another couple of weeks, so I'll just keep on moving forward on this one. So, all right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you.